I'm curious, what were some of the first sort of questions and conversations that you started having with Margot about Harley as you tried to sort of figure out how you were going to approach the character?
Totally. It's interesting because obviously she's played Harley before. And so I think there's certainly like a respect there of like, well, you've already played Harley, so, you know, what do you think? But I think she actually loved the challenge of kind of getting to not completely reinvent Harley, but certainly see her in a different light, a light that doesn't involve being the Joker's girlfriend. Right? And that's the whole beginning of the movie. And I think we just had a lot of fun in crafting a Harley that feels really relatable. And I think she's very much like infused with a lot of Margot, right? Like the sort of the humor that she has, her fondness for food, for animals. You know, that's all Margot too, and so that was really, really fun. And I think we both really want to make sure that she felt real and human and vulnerable in this movie, in a way that you haven't really seen her before.
It's a terrific breakup movie. And I'm not sure that the subtitle made sense to people or does. Like they're like, that's a long title. Why are they doing that? But it's so integral to the story that you're trying to tell. Like, it really is a good breakup movie with her trying to figure out how to take those next steps forward.
Yeah, totally. It's a very existential movie in that way.
You also kick it off in a very fun way, which was your animated sequence. Not anything I was expecting at all. And I kind of realize now after the fact, is it an homage to the Looney Tunes type things that Harley loves watching?
Yeah, definitely. A little bit of that. I mean, I think we sort of try to pay homage to the classic comics as well. And she's such a... She has such a childlike wonder on things, you know. It totally makes sense to me that she'd be eating cereal and watching Looney Tunes, and so it was definitely a play on that, all of it, yeah.
Right, but in those bits too, I thought I saw some traces of Suicide Squad footage. I was wondering, did you use some existing footage from that movie, or did you go back and shoot that stuff yourself?
We did. We actually did use some of the Suicide Squad
Very
footage.
Cool.
Yeah.
And was there a way? How did you sort of match it up to the color palettes and things that you're going for? Did it match pretty well?
I think we tweaked it a little bit to fit in our world, but the whole point was that it should feel like, you know, a memory, and that was what everything that she was thinking through, the flashes of that she was, you know, that was what she was. That was what was impacting her as she's like driving to, you know, do her thing. Right. So I really like that. I like that little flourish, and I think it helped remind people what the significance of Ace Chemicals is.
Did you ever think you were going to get Jared to fill in any of those scenes?
I don't think we need Jared.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just able to exist on its own.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just like she doesn't need a Joker.
I am fascinated by filmmakers who get to put their stamp and design on Gotham. Mm-hmm. And there's been so many over the years now, and even just recently now with Todd Phillips being able to do it, with people watching the television show that was inspired by it, but going back to obviously Nolan and Tim Burton. So what were some of the choices you made aesthetically to how you wanted to sort of present, to me, is such an iconic location that we get to visit every couple of years?
Oh, absolutely. I love Gotham.
Yeah.
You know, I grew up watching the Batman movies and just loving Gotham, and I think there's so many different interpretations of it. I mean, it's been very campy before, like the Joel Schumacher and the Tim Burton ones are quite, you know, exaggerated and campy, and then you got the Christopher Nolan stuff that's very dark and austere and, you know, a little more serious, and, you know, and I think I wanted to sort of try to do something kind of in the middle of that, and on top of that, do something that felt specific to Harley and her perspective. And I feel like we see a lot of, and Gotham is not a lovely place, right? That's the whole point. It's like you have all these amazing villains that run Gotham, and it doesn't work well. It's not a perfect society or you know, by any means. Right. And that's what's so fun about it. Mm-hmm. So a lot of my references, like sort of spiritually, were actually just like New York in the 70s and 80s. I'm a New Yorker. I've lived in downtown New York for a long, long time. So part of me was really like, you know, I love that, like just a personal connection to it. But the way that New York was back then, I think, or at least I guess the idea of it, the nostalgic version of it is that, like, yeah, it was completely broken, like crime infested, you know, like corruption, all of that, but at the same time, like, there's such magic, and there's such crazy characters and crazy stories and amazing art, and all of that thrived alongside it. And that was sort of the Gotham that I wanted to create, where, like, yeah, it's not, you know, it doesn't always work. It's pretty dirty, it's pretty grimy, it's gritty, it's on the streets, you know, the rule of law has not, completely worked.
Right.
But at the same time, like, people are still living their lives and they're having fun and there's still hope, and they just kind of like just keep trudging on, and the spirit of that.
Well, and Harley doesn't look out of place in your vision of
Yes.
it. There's a great moment where she's running through a street fair, and she stops to see the bag that she might actually, stop and buy if she were not being chased by killers.
Totally. I mean, it's funny because I was like, well, how can we camouflage Harley? And then we found the one place that she could actually sort of be camouflaged.
Right. Very true. You put up in a really fun sequence motives for why all these people are furious with Harley, why they would want her dead. And you get a lot of fun with that. I did notice when Black Mask came up, there were a lot of them that went past.
Yes.
So fast that you can't even read any of them. Do you remember any of the fun ones that you put in that might have gone past?
Oh, yeah. We had so much fun throwing out, like, different ones. I think, it was always grounded in character, like what he would be pissed off about, what she would do. And it's just so fun and cheeky.
They have such a long history together.
Exactly. And it obviously shows exactly why, he is our main antagonist.
Right. Oh, let's talk about Ewan for a little bit. I talked to Christina about this too, of how much of it was on the page, all these colorful flourishes that he brings. But working with him, she said, one thing she said that was really interesting was that he made lines that you guys never actually thought would be funny, really funny, just the way that he approached them. So talk to me about how he created that character, because he's, to me, one of the most memorable DC villains that I think we've seen on screen. Thank
you. Well, he also added lines. I like to work in a way where it's a real collaboration between the actors, and we'll have fun on set, and it's very open, and you're completely. And what was great was, like, Christina was not precious with the script either, and quite supportive of that. And so we were just, like, throwing ideas around, and he'll come up with a line, and I love that line. Let's, like, add it in or whatnot. So. That happened a lot, and he's just wickedly funny. But I also think because he really understood the character, he really got it, and he understood, the background of the character, the chip on the shoulder, the desire for power, the desire for control, but also the fact that he couldn't really even control his own emotions. He couldn't control his situation particularly well, and that made him extremely angry all the time, and resentful, and that was why he wanted to do what he was doing, and also he was like a man so in love with himself that he often couldn't, like, see past that. So, like, with all of those ingredients, I thought it was a really interesting and meaty character. And then we always knew that, like, I liked the idea that he was not, this, like, big macho dude that, like, was just the most obvious or stereotypical version of, like, a villain in a female-driven movie. Sure. And obviously he is this party boy, and, he likes his things. He's a collector. He's a collector of masks and artifacts, and of people and humans and of women. And so all of that, and just creating the world of Black Mass and the slickness of it. And, we wanted to kind of make him like this showboat and someone that was, like, cool and interesting. And so, like, there was no one else that could play that character in my mind, and Ewan just brings such charisma and charm to it. And I always said that I wanted to like Roman Sionis. Well, and you do. And that's such a dangerous line to walk. And with almost all of the DC villains, I almost feel like DC does villains in a way. Oh, I love the DC villains for sure. They're so relatable on so many levels. It's almost to the point they overshadow the heroes more often. Yeah, they're very sympathetic. Yeah. They're very sympathetic. They're nuanced. They're interesting. And with Roman, it's like, oh God, you're laughing with him. You're laughing with him. You might think he was even charming, and when you have Ewan there, it makes it even easier. That helps an awful lot. Yes, it does. Does it surprise you now that the DC villains like Joker are getting their own standalone films? Not at all, because I think I totally agree with you. They've always been wonderful and really, really amazing characters, and it's no surprise, I think. I think I spotted a moment where Jai Courtney was on a wanted poster. Is that Jai Courtney there? It went by so quickly. Yeah. Was that just an idea to connect to the existing world? A lot of people look for these threads, that pull all these movies together. Yeah, exactly. It was like a cheeky little nod. Gotcha. That was funny. I just wanted to confirm that was definitely there. The scene that stands out to me also, too, which is shown in the trailers, is the Marilyn Monroe sequence.
it felt like we were able in that moment to go into Harley's mind, for one of the few times. Here's what she's seeing things through, that Harley vision that's important to the comics. Is that what came for the construction of that scene? As you wanted to sort of take us through her vision of, like, in a horrible situation that she's in, this is how she would envision herself?
Yeah, totally. I think that's exactly the intent of it, and it was amazingly fun to shoot and to try to figure out, like, what's the Harley spin on, the classic Marilyn Monroe sequence, and we pay homage in all these interesting ways, and worked with an amazing dance choreographer, Ryan Heffington. He's just a genius, and it was so fun. And Margot's in it, and Ewan's in it, and Chris is in it, and there's actually an extended version of the dance sequence that hopefully will be shared with the world as well. And I used to be a dancer, so it was it's especially fun for me, especially fun to design, to shoot, to kind of recreate the diamonds in our own way.
Right.
And I think at one point I was like, it's kind of like a Lynchian razzmatazz.
Now, so it didn't exist in the script? Like, did you come and say, like, we're putting a dance sequence in the middle of this?
Oh no, the script, it did exist in the script, and
Okay.
it was pretty much like a huge selling point of the script for me. I desperately wanted to do that, and it was something that, like, I kind of focused on in my pitch too, because I think it says a lot. I think it says a lot in a really fun, cheeky way. I think, even the use of the diamond and the symbolism of that, and, this idea that, like, that you want, like, a man has to spend, 2-3 months of his salary on a diamond because they last forever.
Right.
And the symbolism of that, and, like, like that women can be bought in that way, bought and sold in that way. So there was just a lot in there. That I really liked. I loved the line, that, like, I thought a man was meant to get the girl a diamond. I mean, all of it was just very, very spot on, I think, and very, very layered.
Right.
And then we try to, like, expand on that symbolism of, like, putting her in a pantsuit instead of a dress, things like that.
Interesting. Oh, these are things you'll pick up on multiple views.
Yeah,
So
and, like, even the Black Mask. Actually, the whole sequence we shot in the Black Mask Club because it's meant to be, a fantasy taken from that scene, from that location.
Right.
And so, and all the men are wearing the Black Mask masks,
Right,
and
right.
we had pink machine guns.
Right. That's so great. To the point, in the Black Mask Club, Canary sings her song.
Mm-hmm.
It's a man's world, but it would mean nothing without a woman or a girl. Commentary on the comic book genre?
There's so many ways you can interpret that, I guess, but I just like the idea, since we were already doing it with Marilyn, that there would be other moments in the movie where we could just take something that felt very old and traditional and flip it and give it a different, kind of perspective on it.
Well, that's how I read it, so I hope other people read it that way too. Let's keep going through your music, because your song choices are phenomenal.
Oh, thank you.
And add an extra layer of energy that I think a lot of these movies lack sometimes. There are lulls when you have to get exposition, but you figure out ways to cut us through the story on the back of a high energy song. So just talk about your approach with that.
Yeah, I really love music. When we first sat down and we did some camera tests and costume tests, and ultimately there was, like, a little reel that came out and was available online. But I had created playlists for all of our different characters. That was really important to me, and it was such an evocative way of, I think, helping the actors understand their characters.
Is this during the screenwriting process?
This was a little later than that, but this was, like, early prep when we would do camera tests. So normally you just, like, do a kind of traditional camera test, and you're just making sure that the lighting and like the type of camera and the costumes. It's always a costumes and hair test as well.
Right.
But I was actually very much inspired by what Todd Phillips did with the Joker camera test, where it was, like, very interesting. And I don't know if you saw that, but
Was that the first Instagram post that they put out?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Were your camera tests that first trailer that you guys put out?
Yeah, if you call it a trailer, it was the Yes, it was very, very early on.
Yeah.
It was the Moderat song.
Yeah.
So that wasn't a trailer. That was just clips
First
from our
look.
camera test.
Sure.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And the Moderat song was actually a song that I had chosen for Huntress.
Okay.
Originally, but yeah, I kind of created these playlists for everybody, and that's just I always do that for all of my characters. I think it's really fun, and so music was always a huge element of this movie for me.
I'll tell you what we have to do when that comes out. Freeze frame it because the montage goes by really fast.
It
We're
does.
Like, there's Oz. Wait, there's Ewan. I think I see Ewan.
Yeah,
there's
exactly.
Canary.
I think I see him. Yeah,
exactly. Let's transition to the physicality of Margot. You and I talked in the earlier bit about putting her in roller skates, but the interesting thing about Harley, I find, is that she's a person. You know, she's a normal person, and so when you approach stunts, it's not like you can fall back on her superpowers.
Right.
How much do you put?
Which I love. I love that.
Yeah, how much thought do you put into choreographing? You have some amazing fight sequences, and especially the roller skates in the back of the car. How much do you stop to think about, like, I can only put her through so much because she's a person?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I think it was always this interesting line that we were towing with the whole movie. Like, it's a heightened world, but there was also something kind of realistic about it, and I always tried to ground everything in a related human, emotion or something. And so, like with Harley, she's a great gymnast. She obviously knows her way around a mallet and a bat. And that was kind of what we focused on. It's like, okay, so what is she actually able to do? Is her flexibility an asset? And also considering what women are better at in some ways, or how can a woman actually fight men, and it's not necessarily strength, but maybe it's flexibility. Maybe it's the fact that they are smaller and shorter, and they can kind of get around things, or maybe they're faster, or maybe they're more creative, or I think Harley also has a superpower called her brain, and she's very able to psychoanalyze people, and she's quite smart, and she's ahead of you, and how so that was all part of it too. That was by design. That was something that we considered very, very much for all of the characters and for all the action sequences.
How's the conversation when you say, we're going to have her inhale a lot of cocaine?
Well, we just lean into that R rating.
Yeah, I chalked up as something I never thought I would ever see.
I know, but it just feels right.
It really does. There's a great also prison fight sequence where a lot of convicts are released at one time that are in Gotham's prison cells. I was curious, did you ever think about putting a famous, recognizable DC villain in there at any point?
Oh, no, but that would have been a smart idea.
Let's go back. Reshoots. There were reports that Chad Stahelski came on board and helped with the action. I'm curious what your collaboration was like with him, because I came out of this raving about the action sequences and think that they turned out really great. So how did you two work together?
Yeah, so we had been working with 8711 from the get-go, and that was the style that I wanted for the movie. It just felt right. It was that mix of practical but also heightened, where it felt really real, but they were also kind of having fun with it. And I liked the way it was shot. I liked that it wasn't too cutty, all of his work beforehand. And so, during production, I was working mostly with Jonathan Eusebio on that, and he's just a delight, and choreographed some really amazing fight sequences. And then when it came to reshoots, it was let's add more action. Let's just make, let's lean into this. It's working, and let's make it even more cool and badass. And at that time, I think Chad was just available. So it was cool. We got the best of the best.
Isn't that lucky?
Yeah, exactly. So, and because obviously he runs 8711, so it just kind of became this natural fit. And he really, I think, it was really interesting to see how he shoots things too, and working with him in that way, and just kind of having fun, and he's awesome. He's a real, I think it was interesting because he's a real director, and so I think we actually kind of learned a lot from each other, because he's quite a cinephile, and so we would talk about just completely
geeky references.
Yeah, geek out about Tarkovsky and and whatnot, and we'll talk about that, and then he'll be like, well, here's this trick to do this for like you can't. Like if you're shooting a punch, you want to shoot, like little tricks of the trade that he just knows better than anyone, and like the rigging involved and whatnot. So I learned so much from him and his team in terms of just like like how to shoot stunts, how the practicality of like all the equipment and stuff that I'd never seen before. I'd never worked with before.
He joined our show to talk about John Wick 3, and he talked about the dog fight sequences where they sick dogs on people.
Yeah.
And he broke down how many weeks it takes to get the dogs used to your stunt performers, that they have to spend time around each other, so that when you go for these, and you never think about the amount of work that goes into you're watching a sequence and you're like, man, this looks amazing, but it's months of preparation. And that brings me to your funhouse scene, which is fantastic, and I think the reason to go is see this because it's unlike anything that you've ever seen, but it's such a DC Harley, fight sequence.
Yeah.
But halfway through it, I'm watching it, I'm thinking, this must have been crazy to prep, just to choreograph and to pull off all of that. Was it the most daunting thing that you guys worked on in the movie?
Oh, yeah. And, I had doubts about it. Everyone had doubts about it. And thankfully, I stuck to my guns about that one. That was actually an idea I had very, very early on, where there was always going to be that moment when all the women came together and they fought for the final time and to protect Cass. And I thought, let's shoot it in a way where it feels celebratory and fluid, and they're finally the kinks have been worked out and they're working as a team, right. And it's not stop and go, but it just kind of has this momentum to it. And then it was such an interesting interdepartmental challenge, the Funhouse, because it was a lot of production design, and KK Barrett is an absolute genius, and so he creates these little models of things, and actually in the original script it wasn't a Funhouse, it was something else, and then
still a carnival, or?
There are carnival elements to it, but it was not a fun house. Partially probably because Christina was like, I'm not going to write that because that sounds crazy and I don't want to give that challenge to Cathy, But then, of course, I was like, let's do a fun house. And that was really, really just so fun to create in the world of that. And, KK would create these tiny little models. And so you would actually see the whole thing and what it looked like and the layers and textures of it and, and all the female figures and the booby trap and all of that. It was just so fun to infuse it all and figuring out we wanted every woman to sort of have her moment, I guess, or her little corner.
Mary Elizabeth kills a guy on a slide.
Yeah, exactly. That was my fantasy. I can't believe that actually happens. That's insane. And so we just had so much fun with it, and then of course it was production design, it was special effects, so that the actual the physics behind it, and having to work with a slide company and having to work with physicists to figure out how do we do these moving floors, how do we move the carousel, what's the number of people, the weight of the carousel. I think the first carousel we had just buckled under the weight of everyone,
right.
And all of that had to be tested and then created, and then only then could the stunt team actually come in and choreograph it.
Oh my gosh.
And on top of that, then the women had to learn it, of course. And on top of that, for the carousel itself, that was just a crazy task that I regretted at the time imposing on everyone, but now I'm very happy about it, thankful for it. But it was the idea of having all of our women fighting. So it was 5 women, the 4 women plus Cassandra Cain, plus 5 to 10, stunt players as well. Sure. Plus our camera guy on the movie rig, plus all of sound, plus me, plus everyone, and we all had to move in tandem to get out of each other's way.
Oh my gosh!
So that's
incredible.
So we had to watch. I worked with JoJo and the team on choreographing the fight sequence and what it would look like, and I loved the moment where it was past the Cass, and they just we follow Cass and she just gets bumped around, and things come in and out of frame, and we use foreground and background, and then once we saw that, just many times, Maddie Libatique, our amazing DP, would come on the carousel and then kind of start to figure out how to like dance with it, with the camera, and so it became this like kind of epic dance. And because these shots were really long, I mean, there were shots that were like 30 seconds long, and no one can mess it up. And so there was a lot of that, and the whole time Margot's on freaking roller skates. And we had like the bouncy hands. There's just so much going on, and I remember every take that we did too, we actually had to make sure that we started and stopped at the same place because all the backgrounds would change.
Oh my gosh.
But there was actually exactly. Yeah. But actually there was no better way to shoot it, because if you try to cut up a scene like that, it's actually incredibly confusing. You don't know who to look at. The background is changing, So it actually ended up being almost the only way to shoot it. But of course, it was way more challenging that way because you had to get a perfect take in order to move on. You couldn't settle.
Very true. So please, everybody, when you see the movie, pay attention to that sequence. There's a lot of time and effort went into it by a lot of passionate people. So
and a lot of the cast hating my guts for a while.
We're going to run out of time, so I just want to thank you so much for joining the podcast,
Thank
Cathy.
you.
It's a pleasure to talk to you.